The chair legs scrape once on linoleum. Not loud, just enough to be noticed. Lowe's Angels, 1943. Late afternoon light slants through a high, narrow window inside a government office that was never meant to feel theatrical, yet somehow does. The air smells faintly of paper, carbon ink, and something metallic from the radiator ticking behind the wall. A ceiling fan turns, slow and patient, as if it has all the time in the world. On one side of the desk sits a Paramount story editor, jacket still on, hat resting on his knee because he didn't know where else to put it. He has been here before, he expects this to last 10 minutes. Across from him, a government reviewer smiles. Not a friendly smile, not an unfriendly one either, just a professional arrangement of the mouth practiced enough to mean nothing at all. The man's name is Lowell Mellett, and the paper in his hands does not belong to the studio. It belongs to the government. Mellett doesn't look up right away. He adjusts the paper, aligns it with the edge of the desk, and reads silently for a moment longer than feels comfortable. The fan keeps turning. Somewhere down the hall, a door closes. The editor shifts his weight, the brim of the hat bending slightly under his fingers. This was supposed to be guidance. That's the word the studios used, guidance, not approval, not permission, just a quick look from the Office of War Information, a courtesy extended during wartime so everyone could stay aligned. Patriotic tone, no accidental damage to morale, a suggestion here, a line softened there. That's what the editor came for. Mellett clears his throat. He finally looks up, makes brief eye contact, then glances back down as if what he's about to read doesn't require discussion. He speaks calmly, evenly. The picture will not be recommended for overseas release. That's it. No explanation. No raised voice. No follow-up sentence. The words hang in the room longer than they should, not because they're loud but because they are final. The editor doesn't respond right away. His face doesn't change much at all, just a tightening near the jaw, barely visible, as if his body understood the meaning a fraction of a second before his mind caught up. Overseas release. In 1943, those two words are not about box office. They are about survival. Mellett places the paper back on the desk. He doesn't slide it forward. He doesn't pull it away. He simply lets it rest there, flat and ordinary like a grocery receipt. His hands fold together. The smile fades, replaced by a neutral expression that suggests the decision was made somewhere else by someone else and long before this meeting began. The editor nods once, out of habit, out of politeness, out of disbelief. He understands immediately what this sentence actually does. It means the film will not be shown to American troops stationed abroad. It means military bases will not cooperate with production now or in the future. It means shipping priority disappears. It means foreign distributors quietly back away. It means insurance underwriters start asking questions. It means actors tied to the project feel something shift under their feet. All of that from one sentence that will never appear in print. Mellett does not explain any of this. He doesn't need to. The man across from him already knows. Everyone in the industry knows. This is how power works when it doesn't want to be seen working. The editor opens his mouth, then closes it again. He considers asking why. He considers defending the picture. He considers pointing out revisions already made, flags already raised, lines already softened for patriotic clarity. He considers reminding Mellett that the studio has cooperated fully with war bond drives, morale shorts, newsreels. He does none of that. Because none of it applies anymore. This is not a discussion about content. This is not censorship in the old sense. No scenes will be cut. No dialogue rewritten. The film can still be made. It can even still be released domestically, technically. But it will be marked. Not officially, quietly. A film without overseas recommendation is a film that no one wants to be responsible for. Studio executives don't like explaining absences. Stars don't like answering questions from columnists who already know something is wrong. And government agencies don't like being reminded of decisions they never announced. Mellett shifts slightly in his chair, a subtle movement, almost a courtesy. I thought you'd want to know early, he says. The editor nods again, thanks him, because that's what you do when someone has just dismantled your project without raising their voice. He reaches for his hat, careful not to rush, careful not to show the tremor in his hand. As he stands, he realizes something else. This sentence didn't end the movie. It ended the conversation. Mellott doesn't escort him out, doesn't stand, doesn't offer a handshake. He simply watches as the editor walks to the door, opens it, and steps back into the hallway where typewriters clatter and clerks move papers that will shape thousands of unseen decisions. The door closes softly behind him. In the hallway, the editor stops. Just for a second. He leans against the wall, hat pressed flat against his thigh, and exhales. Not dramatically, not in panic, just enough to steady himself. He already knows what happens next. The phone call he has to make, the meeting that will be canceled, the producer who will listen in silence and say, "I see," before asking no further questions. Back in the office, Mellott gathers the papers into a neat stack. The fan keeps turning. And somewhere in Los Angeles, a movie that hasn't even been shot yet begins to disappear, not because it was forbidden but because it was no longer recommended. By the time the editor reaches the parking lot, the sun is already lower than it should be. Los Angeles traffic moves the way it always does, horns, engines, impatience, but he experiences it as something muted, like sound traveling through water. He sits in his car for a moment longer than necessary, keys in hand, staring at the steering wheel as if it might offer guidance of its own. He doesn't start the engine yet. Because once he does, this becomes real. Inside the studio gates, nothing has changed. That's the problem. The guards wave him through. The lot hums with the controlled chaos of wartime Hollywood, sound stages lit, extras cued, carpenters moving flats with practiced efficiency. Posters remind employees to buy war bonds. Flags hang in places no one questioned anymore. And yet the movie is already in trouble. Not because anyone has said so, because no one will. The editor walks straight to his office and closes the door. He doesn't sit. He makes the call standing up, one hand on the desk, the other holding the receiver a few inches away from his ear as if physical distance might soften what he's about to say. The producer listens without interruption. There is no argument, no disbelief, just a pause at the other end of the line, a long one followed by a single question asked carefully. They read it aloud. Yes. Another pause. Did they give a reason? No. That is enough. The producer doesn't ask who else was in the room, doesn't ask whether this can be appealed, doesn't suggest revisions. Those instincts belong to a different era. In 1943, everyone understands that appealing a quiet decision only draws attention to it, and attention is the one thing this kind of power does not need. The producer thanks him, hangs up. And just like that, the pressure begins, not from above, not from the government, but from everywhere else. Within days, the script's momentum stalls, meetings are postponed, department heads are told to hold. Casting discussions continue, but without conviction, names floated and withdrawn in the same breath. No one says the words overseas release out loud, they don't have to. At Paramount Pictures, people start to feel it before they understand it. The legal department asks for clarification on foreign distribution clauses. Accounting quietly revises projections. Publicity slows its planning, then stops altogether. A star's agent calls, casual at first, then sharper, asking whether the studio still considers the project priority. The answer, carefully phrased, is "we're evaluating." That phrase travels fast. In Hollywood, evaluation is a warning. It means no one wants to be first to say no, but everyone is preparing to say it later. Actors sense it immediately. So do directors. Careers are built on instinct here, on knowing when a project is solid and when it's radioactive. And this one is becoming radioactive without ever being named. The most dangerous part is that nothing is official. There is no letter, no ban, no announcement. If asked directly, the studio can honestly say the film is still alive, but everyone involved understands the difference between something alive and something supported. Meanwhile, the Office of War Information says nothing. That silence does the real work. The OWI doesn't call again, doesn't follow up, doesn't check revisions, because it doesn't need to. The decision has already propagated outward, carried by studio fear, by risk calculation, by the unspoken understanding that cooperation with the government during wartime is not optional, even when it pretends to be. One executive suggests a rewrite, nothing major, just tonal adjustments. Another quietly points out that rewrites won't change the recommendation's status unless the office decides it should, and no one knows what would prompt that. The editor realizes something unsettling. The sentence Mellet read wasn't tied to the script at all. It was tied to perception, to how the film might be interpreted overseas, to how it might land in a theater in London during a blackout or in a makeshift screening room near a Pacific base, not because it was dangerous, but because it wasn't useful enough. That distinction matters. Wartime Hollywood has learned to live with censorship. You cut a line, you change a costume, you soften a character, but usefulness is harder to negotiate. A film that doesn't serve the moment becomes invisible. Weeks pass. The director attached to the project stops calling. He doesn't withdraw formally, he just stops returning messages. Another opportunity appears, one that comes with military cooperation and access to equipment. He takes it. An actor's contract option quietly expires. The editor watches this happen with a strange detachment. He knows how it looks from the outside, another stalled picture, another casualty of the times, but he also knows the truth that a single sentence spoken softly in a government office set all of this in motion. No one will ever quote it. No one will ever challenge it. And no one will ever forget it. Because in Hollywood, reputations don't collapse with noise, they thin, they fade, they become associated with questions no one asks directly. The editor hears rumors that other studios have started adjusting scripts preemptively, not for censorship reasons, but to avoid being unnecessary, to avoid the kind of quiet disapproval that never announces itself. Fear spreads laterally. This is how control works when it wants to remain invisible. Not through orders, through anticipation. Late one evening, the editor finds himself alone in his office. The lot outside is darker than usual, blackout regulations enforced unevenly. He opens the script again, reading it not as a story but as a liability. Every scene now seems suspect, not for what it says but for what it doesn't offer. He realizes something else then. This decision didn't just end one movie. It taught the industry how to self-correct, how to align without being told, how to read between lines that were never writ. And as he closes the script, he wonders, not for the first time, whether this was the point all along. The script is never officially cancelled. That detail matters. On paper, the project remains viable for months, sometimes years, depending on who you ask. It sits in filing cabinets, in ledger margins, in memory. It becomes one of those titles people refer to vaguely, the one that didn't move forward, the wartime picture that lost momentum, that thing we looked at before priorities changed. No one lies. They just don't tell the story. By early 1944, the editor has learned to recognize the look. It appears during meetings when a promising idea reaches a certain point and then stalls. A glance between executives, a sentence that trails off, the soft pivot to something else. He knows exactly what it means now. Somewhere, someone has already decided not to recommend it. What haunts him is not the loss of the movie. Movies die all the time. What unsettles him is how cleanly it happened. No confrontation, no villain. Just a sentence read aloud and then released into the system like a dye dropped into water, spreading until everything is faintly tinted. He begins to notice the ripple effects. Scripts arrive pre-shaped, their edges sanded down before anyone asks for revisions. Writers instinctively add scenes that signal usefulness, soldiers bonding, allies cooperating, outcomes that feel inevitable rather than earned. Not because anyone demanded it, but because no one wants to feel that moment across a desk. Studios stop asking what the government wants. They start guessing. That is the real shift. When the war ends, people expect this dynamic to fade, for power to relax, for oversight to withdraw back into proper lanes. In public it does, offices close, committees dissolve, new priorities take over. But habits remain. The editor sees it years later in a different context, when a project quietly loses support after failing to attract institutional enthusiasm. No one mentions recommendations anymore. The language has changed, but the structure is the same. Approval isn't necessary. Absence is enough. He sometimes wonders about the man across the desk that afternoon in 1943, whether he remembers the meeting at all, whether it registered as anything more than another obligation in a long day of obligations. The sentence was read from a memo, after all, not authored, not defended. Just delivered. That's what makes it linger. Because the most effective power doesn't feel powerful to the person wielding it, it feels administrative, routine, almost dull. Years later, the editor tells the story once late at night after a few drinks to someone young enough to think Hollywood used to be simpler. He describes the office, the fan, the smile, the sentence. The listener waits for the twist, the argument, the appeal. There isn't one. That's it, they ask. That's it, he says. The listener laughs, uncomfortable, tries to frame it as bureaucracy, as wartime necessity, as something distant and abstract. The editor doesn't correct them. He knows something they don't. That this kind of moment doesn't belong to a decade or a war. It belongs to a method, a way of shaping behavior without force, of teaching people where the edges are by letting them discover the consequences themselves. The movie was never banned. It was simply left alone. And that he's learned is often worse. Because bans create martyrs, silence creates compliance. Somewhere in a storage room the script still exists, paper aging, ink fatting, it has no scarlet letter stamped across its cover, no warning attached, just the quiet weight of something that once mattered and then, abruptly, did not. The editor keeps that memory to himself now. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. Because once you've seen how easily a single sentence can end a future without announcing itself, you start to notice how often it happens, how many decisions are framed as neutral, how many smiles accompany finality, how rarely anyone raises their voice when they don't have to. The story never became public. It didn't need to. It did its work anyway. And in that way, it never really ended. It just learned how to stay quiet.